Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is going to be our next podcast for the Strong Roots and Wide Branches podcast series that I've been doing. For those of you who may not have joined us before this, basically I have something like a 3 years worth of curriculum program going through the fundamentals of polytheism and how to live a polytheist life and have develop a polytheist practice and all that kind of stuff. I've taught the class all the way through twice, I think. Again, it's a multi-year process because each class is pretty big. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to get all this information out there in a way that was much more kind of opt-in. And so I've been starting to take all of my many hours worth of curriculum and making them into individual bite-sized podcasts. So today is going to be our next installment. I think I have 4 or 5, 3, 4, I don't know. I have some number of others. It doesn't really matter if you do these in an order, but I will be circling back around to some similar themes in every podcast, and we'll talk about that. But all of these are also standalones as well. So let me rearrange some stuff on my screen here. I always like to start with prayer, and so we'll go ahead and start with prayer today. So, blessings and hail to all good spirits. I call upon the guardians and protectors of this house and land and of this space. Rally round, rally round, rally round. We're going to be doing our next podcast for Roots and Branches. I call upon those blessed powers that walk with strong roots and wide branches and that walk with House of Apples. Please watch over this podcast. May the right ears hear it and the right hearts receive it and the right information come through me that you all would like to see out in the world. Blessings to the guardians, blessings to those blessed powers that watch over the internet. May this stay stable. May my technology and my recording be solid. Blessings to the land upon which I stand. Blessings to all of the lands that I've walked to get to this moment. Blessings to the history of the place upon which I currently stand. In my case, blessings to the Awaswas Ohlone speaking ancestors, those ancient people, the bones in the soil, whose land this is and was and will be. Thank you for allowing me to live here and be here and nourishing and supporting me. May those ancestors know peace and healing. May your descendants know sovereignty and justice. May wrongs be righted. May that happen now and in our lifetimes across time. Blessings to our place in the local biomes, in the ecosystems. Blessings to this moment in space, place, and time. Blessings to the living and non-living beings that share this space with me, that I share this space with. Blessings to my ancestors, blessings to all those who've come before. May the ancestors all stand strong. May the harm that you did in your lifetime be healed. May the harm that was done to you in your lifetime be healed. Blessings to the descendants, those who will come later. May my prayers lift you up as your future prayers lift me up. May we leave behind a legacy we can all be proud of. Blessings to the continuation of that which should be continued and the death and disassembly of that which no longer serves. Blessings to the lineages. Blessings to my allies and friends, blessings to the vast guiding forces that know and shape destiny, and blessings to the web from which all things come and to which all things return. Blessings optionally to each one of you who are listening. Blessings in hell. All right, so today's podcast, we're going to be talking about spiritual hygiene, spiritual protection. This is a humongous subject. I like to try to keep these podcasts to no more than about 45 minutes to an hour. At bare minimum, this is a class that I have taught that's taken 3 hours. So we'll see how far we get. And I may end up breaking this up depending on how much I'm talking. We could certainly keep revisiting this, but this is a really important subject. So a couple of disclaimers about this particular subject. We're going to be talking about spiritual hygiene and spiritual protection. These are very deeply culturally rooted concepts. And as is true with all of the polytheist classes and workshops and all that kind of stuff that I teach, I always want to remind folks that if you have something that you're doing, if you're coming out of a tradition that has specific ways of wrapping any of this stuff up, understanding it, etc., your way is correct. And my ideas are just ideas. Maybe they'll work for you and maybe they won't. Kind of up to you. You don't have to be a person who engages in magic and spirity woo kind of stuff in order to be a polytheist or in order to benefit from some of the conversations around any of this stuff. Just because, and flip side, just because somebody engages in magical practices does not make them a polytheist by definition. There are many magical practitioners who are also polytheists. There are many polytheists who also practice various magical traditions and techniques. But these are still separated things. And that's useful and that's important to know. I've definitely been around in the community long enough to know that I've seen some places where there is preferencing, that somehow folks who are more magically inclined get more power in the community. And I think that's a bunch of bullshit, to be honest. Um, because just because you're a solid magical practitioner does not make you a useful community leader or organizer or ritualist. These are all separate skills, important and useful and separate skills. So definitely want to say that. Reminder of what a polytheist is. A polytheist is someone who's guided by the gods, with usually engaging with some amount of devotion, prayer, structured respect, etc. But I've certainly heard folks say, well, a polytheist is somebody who believes in multiple gods. And I wasn't raised Christian, so I'm less married to belief being the number one overriding important factor in engaging with these practices or doing these things. I come from a background where practice and behaviors were more important than beliefs and faith. And so I am not going to be pushing the idea that you need to have faith to be a polytheist, that you need to have belief to be a polytheist. You need to behave like a polytheist to be a polytheist. If we're going, okay, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to the universe, there is the possibility that there may be multiple gods, and I'm not sure if I believe in them or not, but I'm going to behave and act as though I do. As far as I'm concerned, you're a polytheist if you want to call yourself one, which, of course, you get to decide what labels are going to work for you. Um, but I think it's an important reminder that belief doesn't necessarily have to be what defines a polytheist. Practice can also, for some people, be the thing that defines what it means to be a polytheist. But we are believing or acting as though we believe that there are uh, multiple gods out there. That's what a polytheist is. For polytheism as a religion or as a religious motivator, then you'll be engaging in some kind of regular practices, most likely, or those that belief that there's multiple gods is going to inform your behaviors and actions in some way, shape, or form. So, what is polytheist? I'm going to try not to sidetrack too much on any of this because I have a huge amount of ground to cover today. Um, don't expect expertise in any of these many areas after this little brief introduction. I always like to say that too. Oh, I listened to an hour-long podcast by River, and now I know all this kind of stuff. Well, you might need additional practices or work in order to be able to claim expertise. Um, again, I'm going to keep saying different traditions wrap this stuff up differently. Um, if I'm saying stuff and you're thinking, well, in my tradition, we absolutely do not wrap it up like that. We wrap it up in this different way. Yeah, you're for your tradition, you're correct, and I'm wrong. Because I'm not speaking to specific traditions. And when I do, I'll name that. There is no universal practices when it comes to this kind of stuff. This is ideas that, you may not have thought of, or maybe you have. You probably have some ideas about all these subjects. And so we'll just be kind of reviewing the overall on some of this stuff. Different people have different levels of interest, skill, background, inherent talent, access to training, etc., and all of that is okay. One thing I always like to remind folks whenever we start talking about magical how-tos is that you only have to know how if you're actually going to do something with that information. So, like, for example, you don't necessarily need to know how to clean off some kind of very specific curse, from some obscure tradition. If you're not in that tradition and nobody else you know is in that tradition, you don't necessarily, like, it might be a point of interest, but it doesn't need to be a place of expertise for you. Um, there's such a thing. I'm not going to say there's such a thing as knowing too much. There isn't, but we don't want to get distracted necessarily either. We don't need to be an expert in things that we're not engaging with. So I say that as a thing to calm. Like, I know sometimes for me, if I hear like, oh, there's this risk that might happen, it's like, oh, I want to know how to fix that. I want to know how to avoid that or unwire it, etc. But like, I don't need to know how to tame lions if I have no lions in my environment. So, um, how to ward off a lion attack is pretty useless for my everyday life. Whereas navigating, like keeping rats out of my compost, that's the thing I'm dealing with all the time. So, you know, um, we want to take in the information and focus the most on the information based on the lives we're actually living and the situations that we're actually finding ourselves up against. And so, even as I'm talking about spiritual hygiene and spiritual protection, I want that to be something that you kind of keep in the back of your mind, so that you don't get too spun out about some of the information if you're a person that tends towards spin out, which not all of you are, but I'm sure some of you are. Okay, what else do I want to say about this? Part of why I want to talk about this right now, and this is serious, part of why I wanted to talk about this specific subject right now is because we're in a very fraught moment in time in history, especially, but not exclusively, those of us here in the US where I'm based. I can only speak to the environment that I'm living in. Spiritual protection is obviously not a substitute for physical nor even emotional protection, but spiritual protection can be one more tool in our toolbox for helping ourselves, our loved ones, our communities, and folks in our world. Um, we're going to kind of get into this a little bit more further along in the class today, but there's this idea of evil eye. Even if we're not getting into like somebody's intentionally throwing at people that fall into this category, there are certain communities that are that are being very targeted right now, like the trans community, for example. Like here in the US, like folks who are not born American citizens, even folks who are born American citizens whose parents are not, or who may not be white, let's just call it what it is. Uh, Certain categories of people are a lot more at risk right now. And there's being a whole lot of dialogue in the media and all over the place about categories of people who are vulnerable and at risk right now. They're vulnerable and at risk because they're being targeted by government programs, by government agencies, all this kind of stuff. And so obviously spiritual protections are not going to protect you from a change that comes through your state senate or, and the judiciary or any of that kind of stuff. It's not. But I find that when it comes to things like the evil eye, when we feel like we have a target pointed at us, when we're in the crosshairs in that way, spiritual protection, again, it's not going to stop a bullet, but it may help to protect and shield us and our loved ones a little bit more. So I'm offering these as tools because I feel like this is a time when these tools potentially may be at least a little bit useful for some folks. Certainly, I'm finding revisiting this conversation to be useful for myself. So I'm going to talk about it because it's helping me. So your mileage may vary, but I do want to name that. Um, Likewise, spiritual cleansing, spiritual hygiene is a fantastic set of tools for scraping off the ick that we might be navigating through every day. And we're going to talk about all that kind of stuff. All right. So that's my why am I teaching this? So today we're going to be talking about both spiritual hygiene and spiritual protection. I like to talk about these two subjects paired because I think that they're linked. Um, why do I think they're linked? I think that they're linked because, for one thing, if we have spiritual ick coming at us, if we've been, the sort of intentional or unintentional evil eye, and we'll get into some of that stuff in a bit, um, intentional and unintentional hexes and curses and evil eye kind of stuff comes at us as kind of like a type of spiritual detritus. Spiritual cleansing, in part, clears off some of that. Sometimes we might need a deeper level of uncrossing and unhexing and unbinding and all that kind of thing. But for kind of low level stuff, the spiritual cleansing helps to clean off curses. Um, Spiritual protection then keeps us from having that curse thrown at us to begin with, or from it landing any closer for us to then need to do that deeper level of deep clean to get that gunk off. But in my mind, they're very, very related. Staying spiritually cleaner helps to keep us safer. Staying safer helps to keep us spiritually cleaner. And again, we're going to get into it for why we want to be clean and why we want to be protected as we go along. But as far as I'm concerned, these are linked, and so I always talk about them paired. I always talk about these subjects at the same time. So, what is spiritual hygiene? This is a very, very old concept. It's found in lots of traditions worldwide and goes all the way back in time and history, all over the place. Just to name a few, and this is not even remotely in-depth or exhaustive, but if we look at ancient Egypt, they had concepts of spiritual purity and impurity, and they had specific spiritual cleansing techniques that they used both for kind of regular cleansing and then for the kinds of deeper clean that you needed to be able to do certain kinds of spiritual work. We find similar concepts and remedies in ancient Greece and Rome with concepts like miasma, which could, in the case of, some of the stories coming out of Greece, could foul a person's entire bloodline, could foul an entire city. Like you could have from miasma a citywide plague or something like that. And that level of miasma might actually require some kind of dramatic rituals or even sacrifices of variety of sorts to cleanse the miasma, to satisfy whatever that was. Miasma in ancient Greece was considered a contagious power that could take on a life of its own, bringing catastrophe if it wasn't properly cleansed. In Judaism, which is the tradition that I was raised in, we also have a deeply embedded, still to this day, concept of spiritual purity and impurity, um, with specific ritual methods of cleansing, from hand washing rituals with prayers said all the way to full immersion rituals. We call that one a mikveh. We have specific ways that we do that. We have specific buildings, places that you go in order to do that kind of cleansing. Some of our rituals are regular daily rituals. Some are required when we're getting into specific events, like before a wedding or after making physical contact with a dead body, etc. So, in Judaism, we still have this concept that we don't call it miasma, we have other words for it, but, we have this concept of a type of spiritual impurity with the idea that there's specific things that we might have to do either to avoid the contagion to begin with or to clean it off. Um, so, that's an example of a modern tradition. Another modern tradition that I am also initiated in is Santeria. In modern Santeria, we also have all manner of spiritual cleansing prescriptions and protocols, many of which may be determined by divination for specific situations. And many, many practitioners from many different traditions, past and present, have very similar concepts. So, spiritual cleansing and hygiene, it's a good thing. I do find, I'm going to say this, I do find that um, sometimes it can be emotionally fraught or tricky to introduce the concept of spiritual cleansing to a Westerner who has not been brought up in or has had much experience with being introduced to the concept of spiritual hygiene. Um, and sometimes going into a new tradition, it can be very confronting to go, wait a minute, like, are you saying I'm dirty? Like, what does that mean? It can be very confronting for some people to come up with this idea of like there's something spiritually unclean that needs to be remedied or cleaned off. So I do want to say that as we talk about this, the need for spiritual cleansing can be as emotion neutral, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Morality neutral, as like, wash your hands before cooking food. You've used the bathroom, use soap to wash your hands afterwards. Spiritual cleansing doesn't have to be any more fraught than take a shower, brush your teeth, right? We have standard physical hygiene protocols that most of us follow on some regular or semi-regular basis involving maintenance of our food, of our home, of our bodies, of our teeth, etc., etc. So spiritual hygiene, spiritual cleansing is kind of like one more of those things. There is nothing wrong with you if you haven't done a lot of this stuff before. There is nothing wrong with you if you end up in a tradition that tells you you could benefit from more of this. And just like the sort of physical and analogous kind of stuff, certain spiritual actions may require a different level of spiritual cleansing. So the amount of hand washing, for example, you might do after you use the bathroom in your home or whatever while you're just walking around in the world, that's a different level of scrubbing than if you really like got your hands into something very dirty, like you were touching garbage, right? Versus like, or the amount of scrubbing you would need to do if you're now going to perform a surgery as a surgeon. Your hand cleanliness routines are going to look different. I focus really differently on my hand washing before and after. Like, I'm an acupuncture grad student right now. And so the amount of cleaning that I need to do of my own hands before and after I'm handling needles and people's blood, this is very different than like, I don't know, I just came in from being out. I went to the grocery store, I went whatever, and I make myself and myself and my kids, we have to wash our hands when we come in the house just to wash them, right? It's a different kind of a thing. So spiritual situations, likewise, if I'm going to go do some sort of devotional work with my gods, if I'm going to do some kind of spiritual work on behalf of a client, or on behalf of myself, if I'm going to do some kind of spell work, the kind of spiritual cleansing I'm going to do is going to look different versus my like every day I like to do a little cleansing. Um, and then in terms of what is it that we're cleaning, spiritual cleansing may include cleansing of yourself or another person, cleansing of a space, or cleansing of an object, right? So we have different techniques potentially for both different things that we're cleaning, people or things that we're cleaning, and different techniques that may work better for a space versus a person versus an object, etc. As far as spiritual protection goes, again, I'm still kind of introducing these concepts. Again, spiritual protection is a worldwide concept found across time. We find burial items that we're pretty sure are apotropaic, going back thousands of years, all of that kind of stuff. Uh, in terms of what sorts of dangers we might be protecting against, dangers may include intentional curses and baneful workings by practitioners. So again, that sort of intentional, like, I see you and I'm sending a bad thing to you on purpose, and I'm taking steps to do that. Um, often I'll have clients come to me and say, I think I've been cursed and I want to have a uncrossing done. And, you know, sometimes that's true. I mean, there definitely are situations where a practitioner will do a baneful working against somebody. Like they've gotten out their candles and their powders and their whatever it is that in their tradition or their way of doing things, like they are hexing someone. People do that. It's true, they do that. Much of the time they don't. Instead, they do what we call the evil eye. So let's talk about the evil eye for a moment. Evil eye doesn't have to, it can be intentionally sent. It doesn't have to be intentionally sent. Evil eye is sometimes even like bad thoughts or bad words coming from folks who aren't necessarily doing intentional workings. This may also include evil eye coming at us because of a category of people that we are associated with or that we are or are a part of. So like transphobia, homophobia, racism, specific religions, etc. I don't like people who live in Sunnyvale. I don't know. I love Sunnyvale. Don't Sunnyvale. Don't take it personally. But so evil eye could be like just bad thoughts coming. So here's the way that I like to kind of describe the evil eye is that, you know, we kind of walk in the world, and as we walk in the world, we kick up dust, right? Um, that dust kind of lands on us, and that's why most of us will take off our shoes when we get into our house, or maybe you don't take off your shoes before you get in your house, but maybe you take off your shoes at least before you get into your bed, right? You don't want to track in whatever was on your shoes into spaces where you want it to be more clean. You're not going to put your dirty boot in the middle of your kitchen counter and then go cook food without wiping it down first. So we kick up dust. And evil eye, those little thoughts, is kind of like that dust. Most of the time, dust doesn't do anything, right? Um, Evil eye might even be like somebody's kind of grumpy and mad, so now they've like kicked the ground, and so now a little bit of gravel starts to fly out at us. Um, a little bit of gravel, a little bit of dust, we may not even notice. Like it has no negative effect on our world, on our life. We change our shoes and we don't even notice it. We change our clothes, like we run our clothing through the washing machine, and the dust makes no difference whether it was sent at us semi-intentionally or entirely accidentally. We clean it off. Um, if somebody starts really kicking rocks, we might like, oh, like something just hit me in the back. What was that? I don't know. If you're wearing a thicker leather jacket, you might not feel it at all, right? That's where we get in spiritual protection. Um, but every once in a while, sometimes intentionally and sometimes through nobody's fault, that one little piece of gravel, that one little piece of dust hits us in the eye. Now all of a sudden we have a problem, right? Um, Sometimes the lucky shot just happens to make it through. And that's where evil eye can start to become a problem, right? Plus, if we're not noticing and we're not cleaning off that dust and gravel that's getting tossed at us, gravel after a while can make the ground slippery. Gravel after a while can gum up the works, can gum up the mechanisms. It can, we might get some grit in the engine of our car, and now our car's not running well, or we track that gravel in with us and it's fine for us, but it hurts somebody else. You see? So that's where that evil eye kind of stuff can start to become more of an issue. And again, I don't say this to make anybody paranoid. I don't want this to be like, oh no, I'm living in a world of terrible, evil curses coming at me, gravel coming at me all over the place. No, no, no. Like, this is why we do basic spiritual cleansing and very basic spiritual protection. The easiest, littlest things clear this off or help us to avoid it altogether. So, no reason to get upset about it. Um, Again, when we talk about, so there's two things I want to say more about the evil eye. So one of them is that, again, sometimes gravel is getting kicked at us by category. Um, and also, we are also kicking gravel. You're not just the victim of this, you're also the perpetrator. We all have grumpy negative thoughts about everybody. Like, that's normal. This is normal. And so there's some amount of like bane that comes off of us, just like there's some amount of blessing that comes off of us. We're breathing, we breathe out and we breathe in. Like, this is part of what it means to be a person and to be in the society that we're living. We're embedded in communities. Um, so, a couple of things about on the direction of evil eye. One of the reminders I like to give folks, I've seen this quite a lot. In the traditions that I come out of, and again, your mileage may vary, but in the traditions that I come out of, we have this idea that folks have, whether you're aware of them or not, whether you're intentionally interacting with them or not, people have a spiritual team. They have their own protectors and guardians and facilitators, the spirits that bring them blessings, the folks that go out in the world and help them. I stand in certain traditions where we intentionally strengthen and work with those relationships, but the traditions that I come out of says that everybody has some amount of that. Whether you are aware of them or not, whether you're maintaining those relationships or not, that, um, the more initiations we take on, the more community authority we take on, the more leadership roles we take on, the stronger those relationships get, whether we're maintaining them or not. But the louder your voice is, the bigger of a team you have behind you helping get your voice out there. And what that means is that if you don't have initiation and you're not doing community leadership, your voice is only going to carry so far. The amount of evil eye you're going to kind of accidentally put out into the world, it's only going to take you so far. You know, again, we're not talking about doing intentional baneful workings. We're talking about just like, did you see that person? Like that kind of stuff, it only carries so far. Um, as soon as you start taking on more power, being a leader allows you power. As soon as you start getting additional oaths and initiations with bigger entities and formalizing some of those relationships, the stronger your voice is, the more power you have, the further your accidental evil eye goes. I'm sorry, I have to say that. So if you are a leader, I would say keep an eye on your thoughts, keep an eye on your words, because the spirits are listening. And one of the things that can happen, and I've seen it happen, is that somebody says, I hate so and so. They are unfair, or they took my boyfriend, or they got the job I wanted, or blah, whatever the situation is. I'm going to talk a bunch of crap about them. Um, and I'm going to think a bunch of crap about them, and I'm going to grump about it, and I'm going to let everybody know exactly what a jerk I think they are, how mad I am. I feel so not happy with this person. Um, the living are not the only ones that are listening when you're saying stuff like that. Your spirit team is also listening. And I have seen spirit teams kind of go, oh, this person, it sounds like this person's bad and they're hurting my person. And so I'm going to like take some initiative here, even if I wasn't asked to go and mess with that other person or harm that other person or try and take that thing back that you feel like got taken from you by that other person. So the more power you have and the more initiations you have, the more ears are listening when you're talking crap about other people, internally and externally, but especially externally, but internally too. So the more leadership and the more power and the more initiation you have, the more you have to kind of marshal your thoughts and be intentional about what you're saying and doing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't curse people. I'm not saying that actually at all. I'm not. But if you're going to do it on purpose. That's all. Do it on purpose. Don't do it by accident. So, and you want to make sure that if you do have the kind of relationships with a spirit team where you know that they're listening to you and they're trying to help you out in the world and all this kind of stuff, that you're giving them instruction about what you want them to do and what you don't want them to do. Um, there's uh, there's a concept that we have in one of the traditions that I have initiation in, where we have strong blood oath alliances with certain pretty powerful spirits. And those spirits will say to us, you have no enemies, I have enemies, right? So then I'm not the one with an enemy, but you mess with me, you mess with them, they take it on as their enemy rather than me taking it out as an enemy. So that means it's on me. It's on my responsibility to say to them, don't do this. Like, this is what I do want you to do. I do not want you to do this. And so this part over here, no thank you. I am upset and I'm allowed to be upset, but I don't want your help over here. So no, this is off limits. And I do that. That's part of my spirit maintenance, the maintenance of my spiritual relationships, some of my spirits. You have stronger spirits you have oaths with, kind of on your response. It's kind of your responsibility to maintain those relationships. And that may include making sure that you're not accidentally amplifying the evil eye you're putting out in the world. So again, it's not, as we're talking about this, I don't want folks to make the mistake that I'm only talking about how do I, as a pure innocent victim who would never throw curses or hexes or any of that, I would never do that. So obviously the only thing that I should be taking out of this lecture is how to protect myself. No, like we all have impact on the world. And so, yes, how do we protect ourselves? But also, how do we minimize the harm that we are also doing in the world? How do we take responsibility for our power as well? I'm talking about both. So I always want to name that. Another thing I want to say about spiritual protection is there's this thing that I've seen happen a fair amount. I've definitely seen this in various parts of the Santeria communities that I've been part of, that some of the Apollo communities I've been part of, um, and in some of the Western traditions as well. Um, the more formally connected you are with a group, sometimes people throw at the group rather than at the individual. Sometimes people throw at the elder and anybody initiated or under their auspices rather than throwing at you. So, if you have shared oaths or initiations to or with a group, and somebody decides they dislike your group, then you may be at risk for being harmed in terms. So again, we're talking about spiritual protections. So when we talk about spiritual protections, again, we're kind of looking at how do we protect ourselves, but also how do we protect people that we are in association with, that we are in community with? How do we protect our stuff, and how do we protect our space? So um, another thing to say about spiritual protections, your own actions have consequences. So that doesn't mean there aren't any remedies in the event that something happens, but we want to stay mindful about what our actions are, um, because actions do have consequences, including spiritual consequences. Sometimes those consequences are worth it. But it's good to be at least intentional about these things so that we can make plans for how we're going to keep ourselves and our loved ones protected when we're making certain kinds of choices. Spiritual protection, sometimes we might piss off various unseen forces, which can happen by accident too, right? Some of that kind of stuff is about choices we make, and sometimes we don't know. Like I'm thinking about a story. I remember one time I had gone hiking and I encountered, like, I kind of stumbled into this area. I was like, oh, what's this? I found a cave. That's cool. I like caves. And as soon as I got in there, I was like, oh, no, I should not be in here. Like, I got this very strong sense of, like, you are trespassing. And I'm like, oh, crap. Did not mean that. I'm so sorry. And I ended up needing to make offerings to make sure that I didn't piss off this being whose territory I had accidentally stumbled into. So again, we might piss off unseen forces and a variety of unseen forces and in a variety of ways, intentional or unintentional. Um, so, this might be another thing that when we're looking at spiritual protections, how do we protect ourselves against pissing folks off? Let's see what else. Okay, yeah, I talked about that, about the taking initiative. Um, so, that's kind of your intro to spiritual protections as well. Again, sometimes people throwing at us individually or collectively. Sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's coming from the other world in a variety of ways. So that's kind of what we're spiritually protecting against. Um, Other people's faith can be a pretty big thing. One of the things that I've done a fair amount of work with various people in groups is like spiritual protections before going to, you know, rallies or events or protests. I know a bunch of folks that do take spiritual protections around those kinds of events very, very seriously and have had incredible experiences when they're paying attention to um, spiritual protection as one more thing that they're keeping an eye on and allying and partnering with different beings to keep themselves and their group or their loved ones safe around that kind of stuff. All right. Okay, what do we have to do? Spiritual hygiene is often the best place to start when it comes to spiritual protection. Part of what we may be clearing off is evil eye, hexes, and curses, etc. Cleansing may not be enough for a bigger or more intentional working, but it is a great place to start. And spiritual cleansing can help to keep us and others safer. Anyway, let's talk about some of the benefits of spiritual hygiene. Benefits, we can clean off the evil eye. We talked about that a bunch already. Um, Spiritual hygiene helps us to be in better alignment with our spiritual powers, with our blessed powers. It helps us to connect clearly and meaningfully. Um, in Santeria, we have this concept of doing specific kinds of spiritual cleansing protocols before engaging in certain kinds of practices, because our idea as somebody initiated is that um, Orisha shines through us into the world. So, Orisha comes into us and then comes through us. And so we want to be able to receive that clear guidance and blessing and protection and all that good stuff that we get from being involved in the tradition at all. So we have to keep those connections clean. And then whatever we're putting out into the world, on their behalf in whatever way we're doing that, that what's coming through us is also clean. So, um, yeah, so spiritual hygiene helps us on both ends. How do we receive and how do we act in the world? Um, we believe that spiritual hygiene helps us to be able to hear our spirits or our blessed powers more clearly, that we're kind of cleaning out the dust from our ears so that we can actually hear them and receive that information. Um, again, in general, my traditions have concepts of our partnership with our blessed powers, allowing those powers to work in our lives. So if I want to receive the full blessings of, the benefits of working with these different blessed powers, I have to keep those connections clean. And so spiritual hygiene is one of the ways I do that. Um, So, again, for those of us with dedications, oaths, or initiations, certain energies or work shines through us. We need to keep those lenses clean in order to best be able to do that work. For formal initiations and established traditions, you probably have your own um, specific methods, prescriptions, and remedies and concepts. And so, any of you listening in who already have that, please do the thing that your tradition tells you to do rather than whatever my suggestions are, because that's going to be more, appropriate culturally and otherwise. Um, for folks who have initiations or oaths that were created in partnership with blessed powers without the structure of an established tradition, you may want to do either some research or some divination on what specific prescriptions, methods, or remedies will work best for your situation. But I definitely recommend that you ask that question of your blessed powers. What does spiritual hygiene for us look like? How do I best maintain my clear and clean connection, both to be able to receive your blessings and to be able to pour forth your blessings? How do I be a good beacon for you? How do I be a good representative for you? How do I be a good receiver of the things you're giving me? And there's a million different ways to do that, but it's a good conversation to engage in. Another thing, another benefit that's worth naming, I'm going to name it, but with some caveats. When I'm dealing with a person who may be struggling with a possibly possessory situation, cleansing is almost always my first step in addressing the situation. As my elders have told me, and this has been absolutely true to both my experience with myself as well as with folks that I've worked with, um, if you clean yourself or others and you feel better and more clear-headed, then in general, that probably means that the spirit or being that was standing close to you and making you feel kind of woozy was probably not rightful or wasn't one of yours. If you if somebody is starting to feel woozy, like they may go into possession, and they do a spiritual cleansing, you spiritually clean them, and the symptoms get worse, possession becomes more clear, then much of the time that is an indication that may be a rightful possession by a being who has permission to be there. And so then that spiritual cleansing may make the possession happen more easily and more smoothly and be more effective for everybody involved. This is obviously a generalization. There may be very specific situations where either of those things are not true. But in general, I find it as like a decent starting place. Like, oh, like I'm in a ritual with somebody and they're starting to seem like they're sliding off the rails. And if I spiritually clean them and they're like, oh, thank you, I feel so much better, then I probably wasn't rightful. And if I spiritually clean them and they're like, da-dang, like now here we are, like, then that is more likely to be rightful because now we've cleared the way. So now whatever that possessory entity is can come through more effectively. Um, you can't really clean away a rightful possession. You can't. You can negotiate with a rightful possession and say things like, now is not the time. Please, blessed one, please let your person go. But you can't scrub away a rightful possession. But we're not talking about possessory today because that is a whole other subject. I have a ton of stuff to say about that, but that's outside the scope of today's conversation. So we're not going to get into it today. Um, and then in general, I also personally find that when I'm staying spiritually clean, my thoughts are more clear, my life works with more ease, and the things that I try to do happen more easily and more effectively. I'm more in the flow of my life when I'm maintaining my spiritual hygiene. So let's get into spiritual hygiene in a little bit more like practical, like how do you do it? What is it? How do we do that? Um, so we're going to talk a little bit about cleaning ourselves, cleaning other people, cleaning space, cleaning objects. Um, right. So, one of the things to take into account when you're looking at spiritual hygiene, spiritual cleansing, is choosing the appropriate type of cleansing. So, some of the things to take into account when we're thinking about what is appropriate for the situation. Number one, what is culturally appropriate, both for you to be doing and given the situation? So, like, I know lots and lots of general pagans and spiritual minded people who are like, oh, we just sage everything. Well, sage is a very specific cultural cleansing item that has specific protocols and specific ways of being used. If you are not from a tradition that has sage protocols, that may not be the best one for you to reach for. I'm an animist, and my traditions are generally animist traditions. Sage is a plant. A plant is a living thing. They have spirits associated with them. Does that spirit want you to be, do you know the proper protocols for how to harvest or engage with or connect with the plant and the traditions around how to use, how to best utilize that plant? I don't, because I'm not part of those traditions, so I don't use sage personally. And I would definitely recommend that folks think really carefully about what cleansing techniques they're reaching for, and is it culturally appropriate? Culturally appropriate is more than, I don't want to hurt some individual person's feelings, right? Um, Certain plants, for example, may become endangered from overharvesting, and then actual real practitioners can't have access to their sacred items because non-practitioners have all bought it up. And now it's harder to have access to it from the people whose it actually is. Um, again, when it comes to engaging rightfully with blessed powers, with spirits, um, if we're trying to engage rightfully and we're not in right relationship with the tools and the materials themselves, how are we going to use those tools and materials to get into right relationship, which is part of why we do spiritual cleansing to begin with. So, step one is the cleansing technique that I'm aiming towards culturally accessible and appropriate for me to be doing for the situation that I'm in. Uh, in a very, very, very pragmatic, and like we're not even talking about spirit stuff right now, we're just impact. Like, think about the impact of your technique. For example, you might be a person who loves to cleanse with incense. Incense is your thing. It sends a radiance of blessings and clears out the corners from the smell and the smoke and all that kind of stuff. That's great. I love cleaning with incense. I do a lot of incense cleansing. Um, but if you're sharing space with other people who may be allergic or sensitive to the materials, then that's not going to be your best method, right? There are so many different techniques. It shouldn't be hard to find alternatives that work for your needs. Um, you know, I've done spiritual cleansings in spaces like hotel settings during conferences where, honestly, given this particular ritual space, I would love to be able to use something like cascarilla. But like we can't use something that is chalk-like and draw on the walls in a hotel. That's how we lose money. Not allowed to do stuff like that. There are certain spaces where you cannot light things on fire in that space, even though fire is fire-based things, whether it's incense or candles or whatever. Fantastic way to cleanse, not appropriate for every space. Essential oils, things that have a smell, things that you're applying topically. We don't want to be throwing water on carpets necessarily in certain spaces, or we may not want to be um, engaging with chemicals that might harm some of our people. So, step one is also going to be checking like the materials that I have on hand for the kind of cleansing I'm trying to do. Is it safe and appropriate for the people and space that I'm using it for? In a pragmatic way, not in a spiritual way, in a pragmatic way. Is this safe and appropriate for what I'm trying to do? So impact. Um, some I'm a huge fan of DIY. I like we're on the fly, we're doing the best we can with whatever materials we have. Spiritual cleansing techniques are so fluid and flexible that you actually can be pretty creative with what you're coming up with. If you're doing certain kinds of spiritual cleansings fairly regularly, then of course it makes sense to have tools or materials that are easily accessible, that are on hand, that you can use regularly for whatever it is that you're trying to do. But if you find yourself, like, great example, right? I have had times where I'm out shopping somewhere and we wander into a secondhand store, a thrift shop, and there's all sorts of cool stuff in there, and it's also stuffy, and some of these items are like things that people died holding or wearing, or whatever history and story of all those individual objects in this very little enclosed space that isn't being cleansed or worked with or whatever. And I've definitely had the experience where I get out of a secondhand store and I just feel achy or headachy, or like my body feels heavy. I'm having a hard time taking a full breath. I'm like, oh, like I don't feel great on the other side because I need to do a spiritual cleansing. I picked something up while I was wandering out around in the store. I didn't know I was even going to be in the secondhand store because we were just out wandering and we happened to find one, and now we go in and now I come out and so now what? This is where DIY techniques are great. Um, so we'll get into some specifics, but so DIY is a thing as well for spiritual cleansing. Many spiritual supplies are easy to bring around with you as well. You can pack small objects, bags or vials, keep those with you. I have a cute little kit I'm going to show you because I love show and tell. Back when I used to be a tour guide at the Winchester Mystery House, um, I was dealing with spirity woo and stuff and things all the time. And um, I actually made myself a spiritual supply kit that I could wear on my leg underneath my uniform, which is this. It is full of little tiny vials and tubes and all sorts of things, and I could strap it around my leg and wear it under my skirt. So then, if I needed to have some salt or cascarilla or a little bit of rum to make a quick offering in, a corner outside or something, never inside the house, but outside the house, then I would have my little bag of tricks with me. There's things that I keep in my purse. There's, it doesn't have to be like a big bunch of stuff. And oftentimes people kind of have one or two things that are like their go-tos. So then find a portable version. You can bring it with you. Some of my favorite techniques for spiritual cleansing. One of my most favorite techniques is sound. Sound is a great cleanser. You can use rattles, drums, bells, chimes, even your own voice, singing cleansing songs or toning or any of that kind of stuff. Noise is a great spiritual cleanser. So if you're looking for like, how do I clean a hotel room or something like that, using materials that are not going to upset management, a rattle is a fantastic thing to have on hand. Um, and Sunset, yes, sometimes we have sacred bracelets dedicated to certain Orisha. And like I've seen people put bracelets inside of a small box and shake the box and then use that as a type of cleansing. So, there's lots and lots of ways you can use sound. Um, Often when we're cleansing a space, some folks are pretty like, you do counterclockwise for banishing, for getting rid of things, and clockwise for welcoming and blessings and that sort of thing. And, some people like that, and some people are like, that's not how I wrap it up, or that's not part of my tradition. But directionality for some people is a thing. I tend to be more kind of practical about it, like, where is the doors? When I'm cleansing a space, let me just say, when I'm cleansing a space, if it's a single room, like I'm in a single room right now, I start at the door and I go around in a circle and go right back out the door. And then whatever I've kind of cleansed off the space, I literally walk out the door and then kind of shoo it away and shake it off. Um, when I'm done cleaning a space, I then always clean myself next. Because whether I'm cleaning space or cleaning another person, cleaning an object, the last thing I do is clean myself. Sometimes the first thing I do and the last thing I do is clean myself because I don't want to also be like, if I'm feeling kind of heavy, I don't want to be the cause of like, well, I've just cleaned a space by trekking my own crap all around it. So I may clean myself, clean the space, clean myself again. You can never really clean yourself too many times. So, that's kind of a good way to do it. when I'm cleaning my house, I'll start from, I live in a two-story house, so we'll start from the top, clean that space, come down, clean in a circle, and clean right out one of the doors. Is generally how I was taught how to do it, and that's generally how I do it. Your mileage may vary. You can do it however you like. But it's okay. So sound. Sound is a great cleaner. Do I have any of my instruments with me? I left it in the house. Um, I like rattles and I like bells personally. Things that I can hold in one hand while cleaning a space. So those are great. Another great tool is handheld devices like brooms. This is my favorite broom. I've had this thing forever. I love it. I use it all the time. I can use it to clean a space. I can use it to clean myself. It's wonderful. I'm a big fan of brooms. I have a horsetail. I use this for cleaning bigger spaces. My horsetail is wonderful. It is an actual full horsetail. It's very, very large. This is great when I am working in big spaces. Like I can clean literally an entire parade of over 200 people. That's what I have this for. I can also use it to clean my home or clean my space, clean an individual. Fans are another nice one, like a little folding fan. Fans are great for cleaning yourself or your space. Um, Other things that are great, airborne or aromatics. Smoke is really nice if you can tolerate smoke and if it's appropriate for your space. Smoke is wonderful because smoke will permeate. There are certain herbs that are relatively traditional to different traditions. Um, like, for example, I really love mugwort for burning mugwort or some of the aromatics. Bay laurel is great burned. What else? Rosemary is fantastic burned. These are volatile aromatic compounds when you burn them. So, lighting them on fire and letting the smoke really kind of permeate is especially great if like the space is just feeling really heavy and I'm worried that there's energy getting stuck up in corners or under beds or. So that way the smoke will go even in places, even if I didn't get there myself physically, the smoke is going to kind of permeate the whole space or permeate all of me. I do homemade incenses sometimes too, where I'll get different materials and I'll use those, like you burn them on a little charcoal, things like that. Um, if you don't want to burn things, but you still want the benefits of an aromatic, sprays or teas or waters, um, you know, you can make spiritual washes and things like that. Those are all specific. Um, Sometimes there are specific prescriptions for some of these kinds of things, both for incenses, for washes. Um, so some of those are going to be culture or tradition specific. Some of those are also going to be like sometimes you might determine them by divination. So, I feel like there's something wrong in my space and I want to clean it out. So I'm going to do some divination and we'll see what the spirits say. As an herbalist, I have specific relationships and friendships with specific plants. And so sometimes I may lean on a relationship and ask a specific plant. Sometimes as specific as like, I have a redwood tree on my property. Hello, redwood. How do you feel about me burning some of your needles? Is that okay with you? Yes or no? And if no, then I won't do it. But if yes, thank you. That's helpful. Um, so, you have that kind of aromatic. So we got smoke aromatic, we have liquid-based or spray-based aromatic. There's also, you can do bundles of herbs or plants that have an aromatic property to them as well. Like you can get a bunch of fresh mint, fresh eucalyptus, fresh bay laurel, fresh whatever. Make a bundle out of it and then use that as a broom or a whisk. And obviously you can also combine any of these techniques as well. I have certain sprays or washes that I may spray on my broom or on my fan and then clean with that. So I get the benefit of both the actual sweeping as well as the, you know, aromatic properties as well. Let's see, for waters or liquids, different stuff like that. You can do, plain old-fashioned fresh water or salt water or salted water are all things that can be used. Um, Certainly there's things like holy water or waters that you've said different kinds of blessings over. Again, this is where it can start to get some tradition specific. Like I know some Irish polytheists that have ways of making a type of water that involves silver. That's not my tradition and I don't know how to do it, but I know that there are folks that do that sort of thing. Um, Folks who I know who are doing more of the sort of Greek originating traditions may make something called kernips, where they have their own techniques for doing stuff like that. Again, that's kind of tradition specific. Holy water is used by lots of folks for lots of reasons, and holy water ends up crossing over into different kinds of Americana folk magic and hoodoo and espiritismo, and even in Santeria and some other traditions we may use holy water. Um, you can also just use water. One of the things that I used to do back when I was, kind of talking about some of the like, work with what you can get your hands on. Um, I worked as a healthcare provider in an integrative health clinic for a good 10 years back in the day. And I had a tiny little bathroom that was attached to my office space where I was seeing clients. And if a client came in and they had pretty heavy energy, or if I was preparing the room before the client came in to make sure that it was going to be a good space, I might get a little paper cup of water, speak some blessings over the water, and then just kind of dip my fingers in and sprinkle it around the space and sprinkle it over myself. Running your hands under running water, under cold water, is another great way to get rid of some of that kind of stuff. Um, then we also have natural bodies of water. Again, in the Jewish tradition, when we talk about oh, goodness gracious, my brain is turning off. I've been talking for an hour. I said I was going to stop after an hour, and I'm not anywhere near stopping. Um, so, in our cleansing traditions, in a mikveh is supposed to be natural water. So, natural water would be either a water from a body of water like the ocean or a lake or a pond, or rainwater. Um, so it wouldn't be tap water. It wouldn't be running water. It would be water from a quote natural source. Some people like to do ocean cleansings. Um, Literally, I'm just going to jump in the ocean to clean myself up, or use ocean water, or jump in a river and use river water, things like that. Um, let's see, other great techniques, mirrors. Mirrors are wonderful magic. I keep a number of different mirrors that I'll use for spiritual cleansing reasons. Um, there is this concept that you get out of a bunch of different magical traditions that evil doesn't like to look at itself. And so if you show evil itself, it will turn around and leave. If you show a curse itself, it may turn around and leave. So mirrors are traditionally used in many different magical traditions. Um, so like keeping a little dedicated hand mirror is, I've literally taken a little tiny hand mirror and I'll like shine it, all over myself as a way to do spiritual cleansing. Shine it all over, a client, or use it in a space to get rid of um, different kinds of yuck. You can use a plain old-fashioned mirror if you have relationships with spirits or with entities that are associated with mirrors. You can ask them to bless the mirror or to have this mirror be their tool. I also have mirrors that I have sigils written on the backs of. I love mirror magic. Mirrors are great. Big part of my regular spiritual protections as well as spiritual cleansing in my personal usage. I think they're extremely practical and very, very easy. And another thing that's easy to keep in your pocket, you can have a little makeup compact, a little pocket size, like flat. It doesn't take up a lot of space. You can keep it in your pocket, in your purse, in your bag, or whatever. Easy to bring around with you. Um, Other things you can use for spiritual cleansing, food or flowers that can then be left as offerings or dedicated to powers that are participating with you in the cleansing. So I'm going to talk about some concepts that come from Santeria, but it's not so specific and traditional that you couldn't adopt it if you were not in the tradition. In Santeria, we have this concept that um, just because some kind of energy isn't healthy for us doesn't objectively mean that that energy is bad. I remember having a whole conversation with my padrino about this because I was very confused when I first got involved with the tradition, where he tells me take these 5 oranges, clean yourself really well with them, and then put them in the river and give them to Oshun. And I'm like, why would Oshun want the dirt off of my spirit? That sounds disgusting. Like, this is dirty for me. Like, why would I give her something that's like covered in yuck? That sounds offensive. Like, won't she be offended? And he was like, whoa, okay, let's unpack that a little bit because that's not how we wrap it up in our tradition at all. Um, and so what he was pointing out to me is that just because that energy is not something that I can benefit from or use doesn't mean that she can't take it and convert it into something that she can use. So, I mean, a related concept might be, take energy off that is not what we want and bury it in the ground because food garbage can become compost and it can be composted and turned into something wonderfully beneficial and nourishing for other beings, right? Just because something is not healthy for us doesn't make it objectively in all situations unhealthy or bad. Um, Even if somebody threw a curse at me, like my blessed powers can take that curse and utilize it, right? There's curse energy that's already packaged and ready to go. So now they can take it and they can potentially do something else with it. So again, in my traditions, we have this thing around like if we're going to be giving something to one of our blessed powers, we often clean ourselves with it first and then offer it. That's not going to be appropriate in every tradition. And this is why it's important and a good idea to be referencing your own traditions or the traditions that your specific blessed powers are coming out of. Because I could definitely imagine some other tradition where like a god is like, why would you like give me your dirty sponge? Like that's disgusting. Why would you do that to me? That's not what we do here. So, again, like this is why culture and tradition and concepts and all that kind of stuff is really important. But it's a thing you can ask, if you have the ability to do divination or to feel into situations or to have that kind of direct connection with various and sundry blessed powers. Is it appropriate or not for me to give you something that I've cleaned myself with? So you may find that some of your blessed powers like, yeah, that sounds great. Definitely do that. I want to help you in that way, or that would be a benefit to me in some way. And some might be like, no, that's not appropriate to who I am or what our relationship is or how these things go. But again, that's another thing. Often in the traditions that I practice, we may clean ourselves with food, and then we may either again give the food to a blessed power or give the food to the earth, like literally dig a hole, dump the cut up vegetables or fruits or grains or whatever. Like I'm gonna clean myself with it and then put it in a hole in the ground, cover it up. We're composting it, so food may be very, very appropriate as a type of cleansing. Um, Flowers or plants, clean yourself, clean your space. In Espiritismo, as I've learned it, and again, every branch is going to have their own way of doing things. So this is just how I've learned it in my tradition. If we clean with some kind of living plant, or flowers, branches, or whatever, once we're done doing the cleansing, whether we're cleaning ourselves, our space, somebody else, or whatever, we break it in half to break the energy. Um, I've seen this in other traditions too. I've seen this, yeah, we've done this in other things as well. Sometimes we do this even with like certain kinds of tools. But like plants is like it's a bigger deal to break a plate. You know? But plants are easy. But you break it because the idea is that like whatever gunk was on you is now in that object. We break it in order to break the hold, whatever that thing is. So breaking things, that's another great potential technique with that kind of stuff. Let's see, we talked about brooms and fans, feathers. Some people like to clean with feathers. I have an entire rooster wing that I sometimes clean with. I have bird wings that I like to clean with. Um, for me, sometimes I will dedicate those to specific entities. I'm going to show you a pretty one. This here is a fan that I use for Aphrodite. This is a dove wing. I put a bell on it. There's some bones and other things hiding inside of here. So I'll use this when I'm doing cleansing in order to prepare myself or my space or other people when working under her auspices. So We got the bell going as well for that sound that we talked about. Handkerchiefs, or we call them pañuelos, but any kind of pieces of fabric you can use to clean yourself. Any kind of tools for sweeping and wiping, including extremely pragmatic and practical ones. If you have a broom that you use to clean your house, or a vacuum cleaner, you can dedicate those to also spiritually clean while you're physically cleaning. Um, House cleaning is house cleaning, right? Like, I had an old friend who used to, whenever she was cleaning her bovida, which is like a dedicated area that in Espiritismo we use for taking care of spirits. It has glasses of water involved, and whenever she was ready to change the water, she would put all of the water into a bucket along with some soap and whatever else, and she would use that to wash her floors. So, um, blessings to Donna Ebe Ebe, but she's passed. Um, so, cleaning your house, throw some spiritual cleansing products in there. If you're taking a shower anyway, put some spiritual cleansing stuff in your soap or your shampoo or whatever. Um, you can clean with blessings, right? You can bless a space to clean it or to clean yourself. In that way, you can clean with runes or sigils. You can clean with sunlight. Some spiritual energies or entities don't like direct sunlight. So if, there are times where if something, like if I, for example, like, let me think of a good example. Um, at the end of certain kinds of events, sometimes I might feel like my clothing is like, "Bleh." I want to do something with it before I put it in the washing machine. And I feel like throwing some holy water in with my wash is not going to be enough. I may actually put my clothing outside for a few hours in direct sunlight to just let whatever miasmic stuff, be destroyed by sunlight. So sunlight's great. Hitting or shaking things. I have items where I'll like beat it to shake it off. Um, you have ritual cutting, unbinding, or unhooking. Um, I'm going to take up so much time. I'm so sorry. And I did not adequately drag all of my items out, but I have certain knives or hooks that I use to like do cuttings with. So like on myself, or I might do on a client. Like, usually I'll start at the head and make my way down their body, and I'm kind of fairly close but not touching their skin, cutting down to get off whatever might still be hanging on. So unbindings. I may even feel into a person's energy and feel if there's hooks. So, somebody has a lot of feelings about you or about something you are, something you did, old relationships that you're trying to let go of, and the other person doesn't want to let go, or any of that kind of stuff. So you feel in and you imagine where might those hooks be on, like physically, and visualize them physically on their bodies, and find them and take the hooks off. Send it back to sender, return to sender. Um, do I have anything that I'm still holding on to from other people? Can I cut and bring that energy back to me so that I'm not holding on to other folks as well? So ritual cutting, unbinding, and unhooking. Um, in some of these traditions, we'll also do stuff with egg cleansings. Egg cleansings are great. They're so great. You take a